All right. So why don't we go ahead and get started? We're so happy to welcome you to the English Digital Equity Report briefing. My name is Anisha Hingorani, and I'm a policy manager at Chinese for Affirmative Action. We are excited to convene today to share our findings of our research report on digital equity issues that persist in San Francisco Chinatown and policy solutions to address those challenges. We are also excited to have speakers who have spent a lot of time working on these issues to share their perspectives and expertise. Before we begin, I will note that we are recording this event, and we will send out a link to the recording and a link to the slides to attendees and to folks who couldn't make it. So if we can go to next slide. Here's our flow for today. We'll have opening remarks, a summary of the report and policy recommendations, a panel discussion, remarks on the state digital equity landscape, followed by a question and answer portion and our call to action. We encourage you to add questions in the chat throughout our conversation, and we will answer some of them during the Q&A. And now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and we can go to the next slide. Amos Lim is CAA's Economic Justice Program Manager. He has been working in the workforce development arena since 2019, providing limited English proficient community members with employment services and work to remove multiple barriers to employment for the Chinese LEP community living in San Francisco. Amos brings with him extensive experience as a community LGBTQ and immigration activist, issues that he cares deeply about since he immigrated in 1999 to San Francisco. Amos currently lives with his husband and daughter in the outer sunset of San Francisco, and I'm happy to turn it over to Amos to share opening remarks.
Thanks, Anisha. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amos. First, I want to thank you all for coming to our Digital Equity Report briefing today. Before I start, let me just introduce to you the organization I work with, Chinese for Affirmative Action. CAA was founded in 1969 by a group of activists to protect the civil and political rights of Chinese Americans and to advance multiracial democracy in the United States. Today, CAA is a progressive voice in and on behalf of the broader Asian American and Pacific Islander community. We advocate for systemic change that protects immigrant rights, promotes language diversity, and remedies racial and social injustice. The Economic Justice Program at CAA is the oldest direct service program at CAA, advocating for and providing the local San Francisco LEP, which is the Limited English Proficient Population Employment Services, to help them move towards their goal of economic independence and freedom. As we've observed during the worldwide pandemic that caused disruption all across the world, digital equity has become a huge and in some cases insurmountable barriers for the LEP BIPOC community to overcome amidst stressful and difficult period when the world shut down. I'm going to just share with you some of the observations and feedback that we've received from our clients living in Chinatown with respect to their internet challenges at home. And for context, we've served about 200 community members. Excuse me. We serve about 200 community members, access unemployment benefits starting in March 2020, and an average of between 150 to 175 community members a year from 2020 to 2023. Some of the challenges that we observed during the pandemic while helping our clients or community members access unemployment benefits during when the world shuts down includes our community members being unable to seek in-person assistance with their UI claims. They tried calling the language access helpline and it was overloaded, and sometimes they were put on hold for hours. So we started to provide assistance for them to access their unemployment benefits. But we've also found out that they do not have enough bandwidth to go to Zoom, because at that point in time, Zoom was something that was new, and some of the older clients do not have a cell phone or are able to communicate with us or send their documents to us. We also had to help them set up their accounts on EDD's website, help them submit their claims, and also help them find out their status online after we helped them apply because they were unable to access them. We also had problems communicating with them to secure documentation that is needed to apply for unemployment benefits that you need to submit due to the low bandwidth and coverage that they have at home. A lot of our clients also have limited plans with regards to their cell phone and had to rely on the slow internet to go online or to share information for us. While they have some hotspot that their kids brought home, they also found out that the hotspot signal might not be able to penetrate the whole apartment, especially if they have multiple household members accessing it at the same time. With regards to job applications, here are some of the observations that we found is that a lot of our clients do not have enough bandwidth. One more time to go on Zoom, which means they are unable to take employment personality tests that's sometimes required by employers when we're helping them submit their application online, because they're unable to log in to see the questions and to be able to answer the questions on their own. They also have difficulty accessing Zoom during periods where they need to attend interview. That's all done online right now because it keeps buffering. It causes additional stress for them because not only do they have to deal with the lack of confidence due to their low English proficiency, they also have to struggle with buffering or the audio visual dropping out and not understanding the questions asked or not being able to hear the questions being asked. We have used that opportunity, of course, to offer space in our office for our clients. But during the pandemic, that was difficult because we're all supposed to shelter in place. One additional problems is that with the pandemic, we also had to help clients submit their I-9 verification and to confirm that they have original documents. That's very difficult to do without video conferencing or without fast internet connection. In terms of education, we've noticed that the lack of internet access impacts the student ability to learn online. While we know that a lot of school-going students in public school in San Francisco have a hotspot to bring home, that hotspot itself is shared between multiple household members and can sometimes not have enough bandwidth to support a smooth learning process when you have multiple household members going online to study at the same time. Remote learning itself is tough. We don't need to give those who are heavily impacted with the additional stress of trying to maintain a good connection that will enable them to learn. Lastly, we also found that accessibility of the language accessibility in terms of technical support is also lacking. When they have connectivity issues, they're also usually unable to help, seek help that they are able to understand, since most of the assistance is available only in English and Spanish. That's all the observation I have. I'll hand over now to Anisha to take over the rest of the report overview. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amos, for sharing those experiences that we've had with our clients through our economic justice work. And it's really these challenges that our economic justice team encountered when trying to connect clients to unemployment and education that prompted CAA to look more closely into this equity issue. So now I'm happy to go into our report findings and recommendations. As a reminder, we encourage you to add questions in the chat throughout our conversation, and we'll be able to answer some of them during the Q&A. And so next slide, please. Chinatown's digital equity challenges have been around for a long time and can be traced back to the historic disinvestment of neighborhood infrastructure. The digital divide, also known as digital inequity, describes the unequal access to digital technology, including the internet. The pandemic revealed how vital the internet was for all of us, but especially for low-income immigrant communities like San Francisco Chinatown. Without it, community members had difficulties connecting to life-saving services, information, and government and economic resources. Technology advancements means that it takes higher speeds and more bandwidth to do daily tasks like video conferencing, streaming, working, studying, and completing homework. In today's world, we know that unequal access to internet exacerbates racial inequities and limits opportunities. Internet access is no longer a nice to have, but a basic need. Next slide, please. We wanted to create a deeper understanding of the problem so that our city leaders and staff could take our research and work with community to create a plan backed up with resources to address this issue. We worked with a team of graduate student interns to conduct research and develop a policy report with recommendations to address the issue of digital inequity in Chinatown. Our research included multiple strategies, including conversations with policymakers, agency staff, community leaders, and Chinatown residents, data collection, in-person tests, speed tests, and a pricing and speed study of 105 randomly selected addresses in the city. The report looks at broadband internet. Broadband internet is a term for high-speed internet and denotes speeds of at least 25 megabits per second, according to the Federal Communications Commission. This includes both cable and fiber internet. We focused on cable and fiber for our report because they are the broadband options that allow for multiple people to connect to the internet in one household at the same time, which reflects the usage and habits of today's increasingly digital world. Next slide, please. Next slide. The Federal Communications Commission developed a national broadband map that shows broadband availability across the country. In San Francisco, you can see almost all residential areas of the city are served by cable internet in the dark blue, save for a few small pockets designated in the lighter blue shades. And if you can click once, Felicia. When I zoom into Chinatown, you can see that it is one of the only communities that lack cable internet service. Tenderloin, Bayview, and Hunters Point are other areas unserved by cable. This tells us that while the rest of San Francisco is set up for cable, Chinatown and other low-income neighborhoods are left in the dark. This map provides context to the statistic we found, which is that almost half of Chinatown households do not have an internet broadband subscription. Next slide, please. The disparities are even more stark when you look at fiber internet availability. Fiber internet, which is the fastest type of broadband internet, is offered in some parts of the city. However, in Chinatown, designated in the red, the map shows that fiber is virtually non-existent. And you can click once, Felicia. Here you can see it zoomed in. In fact, between these two maps, a pattern starts to emerge where certain neighborhoods are left out of many digital technologies. Advocates have coined this pattern digital redlining to note that many of the neighborhoods that remain disconnected tend to be low-income communities of color, the same neighborhoods that experienced racially discriminatory housing and lending policies. Next slide, please. An important element in our conversation about digital equity is the lack of choice residents have when subscribing to the internet. In Chinatown, we found that there are 9 internet providers, but only a few that offer high speeds. On top of that, the high-speed providers may only have coverage in certain parts of the neighborhood. Functionally, this means that residents really only have one high-speed internet option with adequate coverage. We know that when consumers lack choice, prices are higher, and this is the case in Chinatown. Next slide. We wanted to better understand the quality of the internet offered in Chinatown. We spoke to dozens of community members and surveyed over 40 residents, and the overwhelming sentiment is that the internet connection is slow, very slow actually, unreliable, and unaffordable. Here are some of the survey responses we collected and translated. Residents shared their frustrations and how the slow connection impacted their ability to talk to loved ones, pursue job opportunities, and maintain remote work, and made it challenging for their kids to study. One resident shared that it takes them an average of 30 minutes to send 3 photos. These experiences are the norm for SRO residents who live in older buildings not wired for high-speed internet. Many of us on this webinar, in fact, may not be able to grasp what it's like to be forced to function in that kind of extremely limited digital environment. On top of that, households are paying anywhere from $30 to $60 a month for this type of poor quality internet. Not to mention the fact that many plans do not have fixed prices and surge after 1 year. For low-income households, these pricing schemes are untenable and predatory. While there are discounted plans for income qualifying households, the consensus is that these programs are not adequate. They are often too slow to do daily tasks and also require digital and English literacy to sign up. Next slide, thank you. Our analysis also included a look at prices and speeds of over 100 residential and business addresses across the city for 3 different internet service providers. All of the results are in the report, and we encourage you to take a look, and we wanted to share one of our more important findings. In this figure, you see how AT&T plans compared for addresses in high poverty areas versus low poverty areas. We looked at plans that were at or above 100 megabits per second or below 100 megabits per second. We use this 100 megabits per second benchmark because that's the download speed the FCC set as the national benchmark based on today's average internet users. So for AT&T plans, 23% of high poverty addresses had access to plans with 100 megabits per second or faster speeds. And this is compared to 50% of addresses in low poverty areas. 2/3 of the plans offered in high poverty neighborhoods were below 100 megabits per second. We also calculated that both the slower plans and the faster plans on average cost around $56 a month. Putting the average price and the availability of faster plans together, our research reveals that AT&T offers slower plans in high poverty neighborhoods for the same price as faster plans in low poverty neighborhoods. This tells us that higher poverty neighborhoods are paying the same amount as low poverty neighborhoods and having less to show for it. Next slide. We took a look at how prices and speed compared between Chinatown and neighboring communities. Here's a screenshot that shows Verizon's advertised plans at 2 locations, one in Chinatown and one in North Beach. The plans are priced exactly the same, but the maximum speeds for the North Beach location are 6 times higher than the maximum speeds advertised at the Chinatown address, even though these addresses are less than half a mile apart. If we go to the next slide, our research shows that providers are not required to publish actual speeds, only maximum speeds. This means that residents mostly do not experience advertised speeds. We looked into this by conducting a speed test at a Chinatown restaurant and Financial District restaurant. Both places came back with download and upload speeds well below advertised, but even with that, the Chinatown business, noted in the red bars, still had lower speeds. We did not have the capacity to test more sites, but this suggests that businesses in the financial district have greater access to faster speed plans. We know that slow internet means that Chinatown businesses lose out on revenue generating opportunities to accept cashless payments, conduct e-commerce, and grow their business. Next slide. Immigrant communities who are limited English proficient, like Chinatown, face additional challenges when signing up for internet service or requesting technical and customer support for any service issues. Almost half of Chinatown households do not own a computer or laptop. For those that do, customers do not receive timely and in-language service. A community member shared with us that internet service requests can sometimes take up to 3 months to fix. The major providers do not have Cantonese-speaking customer or technical support staff to help customers navigate their service. As a result, paying customers in Chinatown receive subpar support. Putting all of these findings together, it's clear that Chinatown is experiencing what is called digital discrimination, a term the FCC has adopted recently to describe when unequal access to broadband exists based on income level, race, ethnicity, color, religion, or national origin. Next slide. Our conversations revealed the important role that service providers and community-based organizations in Chinatown play to fill the digital equity gap for seniors, parents, students, and small businesses, especially during COVID. The amount of time and energy many individual staff members have taken on, separate from their main duties, demonstrates how vital internet connection is for Chinatown residents and the importance of long-term solutions. And that brings us to our policy recommendations. So we need, if we go to the next slide, we need our mayor and our board of supervisors to enact systemic solutions that will connect Chinatown residents to fast, reliable, and affordable high-speed internet for the long term. The first recommendation concerns infrastructure investment. We want to see the city expand one of its successful digital equity programs, the Fiber to Housing program, to provide free fiber internet to all low-income communities in the city, starting with historically disinvested communities like Chinatown. We need government to meaningfully partner with and resource trusted community groups to navigate local neighborhood contexts and build buy-in among tenants, businesses, and landlords. There may be some distrust of government intervention, but that is not an excuse, and we need to meet people where they are at. Second, the mayor and the board should hold internet service providers accountable and require them to publish guaranteed minimum speeds, provide price transparency, eliminate misleading pricing schemes, and offer in language customer and technical support in the top 10 most spoken languages in the city. Lastly, we want to see our city leaders take on robust annual data collection and reporting duties so it's clear to communities where they stand in terms of equal access to fast, reliable, and affordable internet. The city has published an ambitious strategic plan with a commitment to launching a scorecard that tracks progress on digital equity goals, and we want to see the city resource that plan and publish the scorecard. So that concludes our overview of the report. And of course, we encourage you to click the link and take a look more in depth as to our report, which includes a lot more details and data visuals. And right now, I'm going to have us transition to our panel discussion. Great. So I'm very excited for us to be joined by two individuals for a panel discussion on the challenges and possibilities to connect Chinatown residents and businesses to affordable high-speed internet. These two are dedicated advocates who have spent years working to address the digital divide for Chinatown residents, and we were happy to feature their stories and their efforts in our report. So our first panelist is Calvin Nguyen. Calvin Nguyen is a legislative aide to Aaron Peskin, the president of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors and supervisor for the Northeast quadrant of the city, which includes historic neighborhoods like Chinatown, North Beach, and Upper Tenderloin. Calvin immigrated to the US when he was 7 and grew up in Chinatown, among many of the organizations that continue to advocate and service the community's monolingual immigrant community. Jen Chan is our next panelist. Jen is a D10 San Francisco native who grew up in Visitation Valley and continues to live there with her daughters and husband. She's been with Chinatown CDC for 15 years and holds a BA in Asian American Studies and a Master's of Social Work. Jen believes that the best policies are created by the community for the community. So we have invited them to join this briefing to talk about the on-the-ground challenges and lessons learned from connecting tenants to broadband internet and the benefits that they've seen. So I'll start us off with some questions. And again, please note your questions for them in the chat, and we will get to them during the Q&A. So thank you again, Jen and Calvin, for joining us. My first question is actually for Calvin. I would love for you to tell us about your experience with the digital divide in Chinatown.
Got it. Actually, I feel like I should let Jen speak first because I do believe what she said, that a lot of great policy does come from the community. And that's actually why I was invited to speak, because during the pandemic, we did, without repeating all the reasons that Anisha have reported, we, as a supervisor of the district that oversees Chinatown, we have received a lot of concerns about access to internet when a lot of kids were out of school and they had to do homework and go to online learning. And when a lot of seniors were unable to go to their senior center, there was a lot of requests for access to high-speed internet for online learning, online community meetings. So Jen, working for organizations and a lot of advocates who live in SROs, single roof occupancy in the community, came to our office asking to see what we can do to help. And I want to step back a little bit. I don't know if everyone in the seminar right now understands Chinatown in San Francisco is particularly special, not only in that it is an ethnic enclave with a lot of immigrant and low-income seniors and families, but the building type and where folks live are mostly what we call single room occupancy, meaning imagine a dorm room, but it's where a lot of folks live on the same floor with a shared facility, meaning they share restroom, they share bathroom, they share kitchen. And the spaces, on average, they're living in a 10 by 10 at most space, where it's not one individual, but it's actually a whole family, maybe sometime multi-generations. So our office came in and wanted to see what we can do to extend the existing fiber to housing network that the city has installed. It's a fiber network into the community. We allocated some funding to pilot the program where we can draw the fiber high-speed internet into specifically privately owned building with residents living, SRO residents. I just want to highlight the city's fiber to housing program is a program that connects a lot of public housing and supportive housing sites to the city network. But we saw that there was a gap for a lot of privately resident living in privately owned residential buildings like SROs in Chinatown. So we did that, and we had a lot of learnings. We piloted a program to 5 different buildings, and as far as I can see, it took a lot of persuasion. We did talk to about 12 different buildings, property owners. About 5 of them ended up accepting the program. And I've heard that we definitely have reached a speed where all the residents are accessing internet at the FCC broadband definition.
Thank you, Calvin. And this question is for Jen. I would love to hear how the digital divide impacted community members you work with. And I know you work with a number of different community members, whether they're SRO tenants, young people, seniors, workers, and small businesses.
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit more about that. I think in particular, when we're looking at, during the pandemic, also post-pandemic, we still continue to see a lot of struggle for families to access, high speeds in, SROs, but also in some of our affordable housing, considering the infrastructure of what Chinatown is, we're kind of in a valley. If you don't have a good connection, it's really hard to stay on, especially if you have children, multiple children in the household. That becomes an issue when they're trying to do their homework, with families that are looking to get employed and work. Filling out applications, housing applications, job applications become difficult because the session may get timed out and you're unable to finish it, and then you have to start all over again. And then with seniors, we see that, it becomes very isolating because they aren't able to connect with folks, as we've transitioned in the world to, things like WeChat, WhatsApp, connecting with family, but also watching things like YouTube, then becomes increasingly hard for seniors to then be connected with people outside their unit. And so that's kind of a common trend that we've seen, not just during COVID, but prior to COVID, and continually we'll still see that, as the report stated, close to about 40 to 50% of the households in Chinatown do not have broadband internet. And that's one of the reasons why is, one, the cost, but 2, the cost of what you're paying for and the connection that you see. And so that's an overarching, I think, theme that we have continued to see over the last decade.
Thank you so much, Jen. And moving to Calvin, you mentioned that as part of the SRO pilot, you reached out to 12 property owners, but were only able to work with 5 buildings. And so I think that points very much to the challenges and the lessons learned that you experienced when trying to address the issue for Chinatown. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to expand on that.
Yeah, I think looking at internet access, it has to be a collaboration between multiple entities. Of course, we have to rely on our ISP, our internet service providers, to be able to have the infrastructure to and offer a service that is affordable to many of our residents, no matter their income level. As your CAA's report recommended, there needs to be policy in place too from the government's perspective. But we also rely heavily on some of the private entities. With what my example was with the fiber to housing, we do need property owners to do two things: to ensure that the building have the infrastructure to receive fiber, even if there's going to be high-speed internet fiber in the community. There needs to be a connection between the infrastructure itself, but also inside the building, especially in SROs. The building type, because residents are densely packed in, say, a floor of 20 household, each of those rooms need to have access, equal access to. And I know that the building types and the way it is for the structure, sometimes we need to look at how we can get even internally, even if you have internet in the building, can you get enough routers for the signal to go through and penetrate through all the rooms? So we do need our partnership from our private and property owners. Unfortunately, the 5 that we've worked with have always been long time community champions who are property owners, but also really understands the needs of the community. But a lot of them also, because of the building type, they offer really low rents for a lot of the SRO families. And they have reported sometimes that because they continuously over the decades have charged such low rent, they don't have the funds for a major upgrade. So I can see there is a challenge there that we need to overcome, where how we can support small mom and pop owners who's been responsible to community needs, but how we can support them to make sure that the building can be upgraded.
Got it. And that totally makes sense because as we've heard in our research, it can take upwards of $20,000 to wire buildings, if not more.
Yes.
And I know there's also efforts to make sure that new buildings have that infrastructure in place, but then there's a lot of aging infrastructure in Chinatown that we really need to make sure we have investments and solutions for.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Jen to hear your thoughts on the types of investments you'd like to see to address the digital divide challenges in Chinatown. If you had not really a blank check, Jen, but like if you had kind of resources or investments, where would you like to see that prioritized?
I think we'd like to see it in several aspects. I think Calvin already mentioned one, supporting property owners, but also businesses so that they can have these upgrades. I think the internet service providers also need to play a much bigger role in this in terms of the infrastructure that we see and continue to have in Chinatown. It's very old infrastructure that really needs to be upgraded. But in order to do that, that would be a partnership with internet service providers like AT&T, who hold a lot of those service lines in Chinatown, but also, working with newer companies who are looking to really wanting to invest in the neighborhood. But they can't because they don't have, maybe the necessary connections to get the paperwork or the materials needed to kind of build that relationship with AT&T to get that. Um, Also, building owners as well. I think they all play a big part of it. I think you can't really do this without, community-based organizations or city government as well. As Calvin mentioned, the city has been super responsive and actually has been one of the biggest advocates, I would say, outside CBOs in really ensuring that this infrastructure is put in and allowing, residents in our public housing, in our SROs to really get this upgrade. But, as we all know, internet really isn't nice to have anymore. It's really essential for us to thrive as a community and for our families and for our seniors to do so. And if we were given, a blank check to be able to do that, I think really the infrastructure piece is probably the initial piece that we would have to do in a lot of the wiring connections outside on the street, but also, extending the extensions through different parts of the city from, the libraries to community centers. Those are also vital places that would need this outside of our homes that we have in the community. And I think from there, we'd be able to provide more in language access, not just for Chinatown, but I think we can see that in the report across the city. Many communities that are low income have a similar speed rate as Chinatown, but also are not getting, that full package of what's necessary. So I think, what we're also looking at is that policy pieces that really ensure that, we are getting minimal speeds, as the report wrote, um, but also that those communities also have that infrastructure put in and the language piece. You know, for a lot of our residents in Chinatown, in San Francisco, who may not have English as their first language, but also lowering the threshold for the application process for a lot of these internet service providers as well.
Got it. Thank you so much, Jen. We are at time, and I do want to keep us moving because we have some great remarks by Anne, but I really wanted to thank Calvin and Jen for sharing your experiences and perspectives. And thank you, honestly, for all of your hard work over the years to ensure residents are not left behind when it comes to this critical basic need. And now I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, Ann Nguyen, who will share some important opportunities at the state level to address digital inequities for communities like Chinatown. And so Ann Q. Nguyen is an engagement and operations manager at the California Department of Technology, Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy. She managed an expansive and inclusive state digital equity planning process and engaged over 50,000 California stakeholders whose input informed the draft plan and led an accessible public comment process to further inform the final state digital equity plan. Anne received a bachelor's degree at UCLA and a master's of public affairs at UC Berkeley, Goldman School of Public Policy. I'll turn it to you, Anne.
Thank you so much, Anisha, and thank you, panelists, and all who have been working really hard towards digital equity. As Anisha shared, our team, the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy at CDT, coordinates the implementation of the state Broadband for All program through the multi-agency California Broadband Council. So before I go even into the next step, I wanted to give context to what the state is doing under the umbrella of Broadband for All. So next slide, please. Okay, so Broadband for All aims to close the state's digital divide, which impacts 1 in 5 Californians, often those most vulnerable among us who lack access to infrastructure, affordable internet service and devices, and the skills and training to use them, as you all have mentioned earlier. This plan came out and authored by the California Broadband Council even as early as 2020, and these goals here on the slide continue to be our guiding stars. So Broadband for All 3 main goals that all residents have high performance broadband at home, schools, libraries, and business, access to affordable services and devices, and access to digital literacy and skills training to enable digital inclusion. Next slide. And Broadband for All initiatives aims at overcoming 3 main digital equity barriers, including access or availability of infrastructure, affordability, and adoption and digital literacy. In the center, in order to address all the barriers, then we can achieve digital equity. So the state has been investing billions in infrastructure to develop a statewide open access middle mile network, fund last mile deployment to increase access and competition, and also promote low cost internet service offers. Next slide. That brings us to the next chapter, right? So over the last year, we have worked expansively to develop the state digital equity plan. The Digital Equity Act calls states and broadband offices across the country to invest in a covered population, which I listed here. Many, as you can tell, are shared by communities in San Francisco, in Chinatown. The 9th and 10th population that we also have here is actually called out in a sister federal program called BEAD, which is administered by the CPUC, but it calls for women and LGBTQI plus communities to be prioritized in economic development. So just want to highlight that. And all of our report really center the covered populations and how to best serve. So going back to the state digital equity plan, we had input from over 50,000 residents and stakeholder groups. We developed a very inclusive process utilizing virtual and in-person engagement. We had ASL language translator to bring in voices from the most vulnerable community members and often unheard residents. We developed a statewide online and mobile survey, translated into 14 different languages, and embedded voice-to-text functionality for sight-impaired and individuals with language barriers or low literacy. So next slide, please. Okay, and so here I have a QR code that will link you directly to our state digital equity plan landing page on the Broadband portal. In the next day or two, it would be refreshed to have our most updated plan. And the components of the plan is on there in HTML, and we can use the translated function on the top of the screen to access it in over 100 languages. So the executive summary all the way to dependencies is available in PDF as well as HTML. And the draft of it, when posted back in December, was used as a way for community members to review what we have written. And following that December was a 45-day public comment period where we engage communities and take in consideration of all comments and apply it to the final plan. So just kind of give the higher level framework. Next slide, please. Yep, I wanted to highlight the next two slides to give an idea of how CBOs as well as the way our accessible strategies yield representation from community members from our covered population, as well as if you look on the left is the language of submission, right? We received about 40,000 responses, many of which came from the simplified, or responses were in simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese, as well as many of the top 14 languages in the state. And then to the right, it shows how many of our covered populations actually answered the survey. So just to show the representation as well as the power of community organizing when we work with CBOs at the local level to participate in these surveys. Next slide, please. And then to also underscore what you mentioned earlier regarding community organization and shared barriers to achieving digital equity, here are some themes we found through the digital equity ecosystem mapping tool. The key themes include general lack of funding availability, capacity, managing layered funding streams, increased program costs with little to no accompanying increase in funding. So we have this slide here to show that we have heard from community members and made sure to address this in our final state digital equity plan. Next slide. And so that brings me back to the potential uses of state capacity grant program fund, right? Once acknowledged by NTIA, it will make the state eligible for additional federal funds to implement the plan. The plan calls for funding state-managed efforts and establishing a sub-grant program to fund local non-infrastructure related efforts like the ones listed here. And then these grants will be targeted to community-based organizations who are trusted messengers and can overcome the inherent mistrust of government and corporations. to deliver culturally competent programming in language in community to those who are most in need. And my last slide, please. Okay, and then just a few steps. We are expecting from the NTIA an acknowledgement of our plan, and the federal capacity grant funding opportunity, the NOFO, has been released as of March 29th. Formulaically, California is eligible and can apply to the $70.2 million, but that submitting the plan makes us eligible to apply. So we have not received the money. Just want to make that clear. And then the application for the state to apply is due on May 28th. So in terms of timing, that's kind of what I can outline at this time. We encourage continued participation in the plan implementation process. You all have done a great job being a partner, and we continue to encourage you all to continue to participate. The QR code here will lead you to our subscribe to our monthly newsletter. And something I want to flag too, that in the coming months, excuse me, the NTIA will release competitive grant information, which allows further funding to the state. So stay tuned. We will have details in our broadband newsletters linking to the sources. So next slide. And I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne, for sharing your exciting updates. And good to know that there are resources that the state can apply for that localities and CBOs can access to be able to ensure that we're funding digital literacy, we're funding kind of in language engagement, and all of the important things and ways to really ensure adoption is there for communities like Chinatown. So we are near the end of our hour, and we wanted to answer questions that have come up. And so we've noted a question or two in the chat. But we did also ask folks who registered to share any questions that they had, and we're going to start with those. So the first question is we received from Sitza Goffard from Asian Law Caucus. And the question is, how can local organizations like ours support the push for better, more affordable digital accessibility in Chinatown? And before I pass it to our speakers, I just want to take some time to throw in a plug for our call to action, which we will be dropping in the chat. And this call to action directs the mayor and the board and really urges them to invest in expanding fiber to housing, requiring more transparency and accessibility from our ISPs that service the city, and to publish the digital scorecard so community members know where they stand and how the city is actually making progress on eliminating the digital divide. I would also say that if you work with clients that live in San Francisco Chinatown, I would encourage you to really seek their feedback on their broadband internet experiences and what changes they would like to see. Do any of our speakers have anything else to add? Maybe Jen or Calvin, any thoughts on how organizations can support the push for more digital accessibility in Chinatown?
I'm happy to go first. I do think that conversations like this and receiving public comments from community, call your supervisor, calling the mayor really helps. I forgot to mention earlier that it's because of organizations like this that we're doing the work that we're doing right now. And I forgot to mention earlier that because of our pilot program in Chinatown, that our Department of Technology is or has applied for a last mile FA program where we're trying to see if we could get funding to expand the pilot program, not only in Chinatown, but also to Bayview and Tenderloin, two of the other densely populated community where there's a lot of low-income families. And I think the purpose and the way that the Department of Technology and our office have communicated and talked about is considering internet as a basic need and as a public utility. I think from our office perspective, Supervisor Peskin has always been a champion for utility to be public. I know we've seen him talk about how electricity, PG&E should be a public utility, and he's advocated for that. And I think we can consider internet as a public utility as well in San Francisco, if we can consider the city as a ISP, internet service provider in some way, we can maybe move faster in trying to get high-speed internet to the resident in need. And I think working with the experience of like city working with a lot of nonprofit, we may be able to check a lot of the points that you have CEA report has mentioned. It could be cultural competency, but also reaching those that we know are in need right now.
I think another way that other, CBOs can also be a part of the effort is, there's a lot of advocacy that is needed, I think, around getting a lot of policies pushed, as written in the report as well. And so I think in terms of that, partnering with other nonprofits is one way to really push for these policies, as a coalition, or coming together as a group. That's one way. I also think if, organizations have the ability to see what some of the needs the constituents that they're serving has and kind of report that back to us as a larger group, to be able to track that information as it evolves and change. But also we have service providers that are not just servicing, Chinatown, but areas in the, the Mission, the TL, Bayview as well. And I think, putting forward a collective effort in terms of that aspect would be able to push more policies, but also deepening, as Calvin mentioned, our efforts to work with the city to maybe look at more city to fiber, but also holding, the ISPs more accountable to the work that they are doing and serving our neighborhoods.
Thank you so much, Jen. And just to underscore that detail that Calvin lifted up, we connected with the Department of Technology, and we were really happy to learn that they had applied for $10 million in federal funding, and this would help expand fiber to housing for renters and small businesses in Bayview, in Chinatown, and in Tenderloin. So we're excited to see, hopefully the city gets those funds to expand fiber in these communities. We did receive a question from Melissa King from Shelter Tech. And that question is, what are the main obstacles to installing Wi-Fi in SROs in this area? And so Jen or Calvin, I'm not sure if you wanted to go more into depth on that.
I can talk a little bit about that. One of the hardest things that we found when we were working with the city for the city fiber program is the nature of how old some of our buildings are in Chinatown. But also, as I mentioned earlier, we are kind of in a very odd location in Chinatown where we're kind of at the base of a hill. So those are kind of two pieces that make getting a lot of that the signal difficult, especially in our older buildings that are really old and like made out of cement. That's one of the pieces. Calvin also mentioned this earlier. Figuring out location points within the building to receive the signal, but also finding buildings that are in Chinatown that have higher structures so that they could bounce off or kind of tether that connection. Seemingly for us, when we were working through this process, seemed most challenging for us in terms of the infrastructure piece. Calvin, I'll let you add a little bit more, maybe from the city side, what y'all came across when you guys were doing that piece.
And I have to preface, I'm not a information technology person, and I'm only learning this through working with our amazing engineers who has gone through the building. But what I've learned, yes, there's a lot of infrastructure challenges to overcome, but in our pilot program, at least what I've learned, there are current technology that could to find a way. In fact, I think the system that the Department of Technology team install in the buildings that we have, even the most difficult buildings, they were able to install basically a minimal impact on the building where they put basically a lot of routers. And even for the receivers inside one of these buildings, they don't have to bolt it down. If there's a way for there to be a line of sight between our internet hubs to the satellite buildings, they can manage to pull in the fiber network into the building. And that's another thing. I think because a lot of building owners thought that it's going to be a very invasive upgrade, even to receive our pilot program. They rejected our offer. If the community members can really talk to your landlord, to your property management, that there was a way to do it without damaging the building, I think that would help us build community trust so that we can work with the building owners to expand our current pilot program with the current technology that we're using.
Thank you so much both for your responses. And we are close to time. And so I'd like to thank our wonderful speakers today, Amos, Calvin, Jen, and Anne, for their insights and efforts to ensure communities like Chinatown are not left behind. And to reiterate that this is challenging but necessary work. And so I have one final slide for us, which is our closing and call to action. We really encourage you to read, share, the report and to participate in the call to action, which takes seconds to fill out to let our local policymakers know that you want to see action and investments so that digital deserts in San Francisco are a thing of the past. We will follow up with an email with the report link, recording, and slides. And we're also dropping our speakers' contact information as well. I wanted to thank our amazing production team who made this briefing possible, Felicia and our CAA staff, Annette and Crystal. Thank you so much for your behind the scenes work. And thank you all for attending and spending the hour with us. We really appreciate the opportunity to share our report findings with you and to hear from local practitioners and policymakers. And we look forward to continuing to engage you on this issue and the different policy and advocacy opportunities. So thanks again, y'all, and hope you all have a good rest of your day.